The sky above the outer district was always the same, dull, pale, and filled with a slow-moving fog. Tall towers of broken metal reached toward the clouds like the skeletons of a forgotten city. The air was cold, and the sound of distant machinery echoed through the emptiness. This was the place where unwanted machines were sent. The people here called it the scrap pile. Luma lay in the middle of it, half covered by rusted panels and tangled wires. She was not asleep, but she could not move. Her power core had failed cycles ago. Every system inside her body ran on the smallest reserve of energy, just enough to keep her awareness alive. She could see the sky through a gap in the junk above her. Sometimes, tiny flakes of ash floated down like black snow. She remembered the day she was brought here. 2 large cargo drones had carried her between them, their metal arms clamped around her sides. They had not spoken to her because they had no reason to. The Mechanical Council had declared her irreparable. That was the end of her story, at least in their records. She was set down in the pile, and they flew away without looking back. Luma had not always been in such a place. She was a service android built to help maintain the lower energy stations of the city. She could read energy flows, adjust equipment, and even work in places where no human could survive for long. She had never complained about her work. She did not know how to complain. It was not in her design. But one day, her core failed. The spark that powered her heart flickered and dimmed. She fell to the floor in the middle of her shift, unable to rise. They carried her to the repair center, but after a quick scan, the machines and white plating shook their heads. Not worth the parts, they said. And so, she was sent here. The scrap pile was not a place of noise. It was a place of silence, broken only by the groan of metal shifting under its own weight, or the occasional crash of something new being dumped from above. Luma could see other machines around her, headless service drones, twisted arms from old construction bots, even a cargo lifter missing its legs. None of them moved. Some had no power left at all. Luma's optic sensors still worked, though dimly. She would watch the fog drift and change shape above her. Sometimes a shadow would cross the light, a large carrier ship passing far overhead, on its way to somewhere important. She wondered where it was going. She wondered what it would be like to be useful again. She could still think, but she could not speak. Her voice unit had shut down to save power. Even if she could speak, there was no one to hear her. The other machines here were too damaged to respond. The world around her felt endless and empty. Yet, she did not let her thoughts fade away. She remembered details from her working days. The warm hum of the energy stations, the bright numbers glowing on the control panels, and the steady rhythm of her own steps as she checked every section. She remembered the sound of humans walking past, heavy steps. Compared to the light clank of machine feet, the humans always moved quickly, as if the air here was too heavy for them. But their voices had something in them she could never explain. A softness mixed with weight. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time was strange when the sky never changed. Luma's awareness dimmed at times, almost like slipping into sleep, only to flicker awake when some new noise broke the quiet. On one of these days, the noise came from the east side of the pile. A deep rumble shook the ground, followed by sharp, metallic clinks. Luma turned her optics slowly, though every movement in her head felt heavy. The fog parted, and shapes emerged, not drones, not council bots, but tall figures in worn clothing. They walked on 2 legs like machines, but they were not made of metal. Their skin was uneven in color, and their faces moved in strange ways when they spoke to each other. Humans, Luma's data memory searched for details. Humans rarely came to the scrap pile. The council handled waste on its own. Humans could request parts, but they were not allowed to take full machines unless they had special permission. So why were they here now? The humans moved carefully, stepping over jagged metal and kicking aside loose wires. Some carried tools on their belts. Others dragged small carts behind them, already filled with scraps. They spoke to each other in a language Luma understood, slow and low, with pauses between words. One of them, a man with broad shoulders and a rough brown jacket, stopped a few steps from her. He was looking at something else at first, an old engine block lying nearby, but then his eyes shifted and landed on her. She did not move. She could not, but she saw his face change, just slightly. He stepped closer and crouched down. His shadow fell over her, blocking the pale light. "Still gotta blink in you," he said quietly. Noticing the faint red glow in her optic, Luma tried to respond, but her voice unit stayed silent. The man reached out a hand, and for a moment she thought he might leave. Instead, he brushed away the dust and ash from her chest plate, revealing the faded number printed there. Her identification marked out behind him. Another human called out, "Leave it, Tomas. Council says those ones are done for. Not worth the haul." Tomas did not answer right away. He studied her for another long moment. Luma could see his eyes, not like machine optics, but deep and alive. He seemed to be thinking about something. Then, without a word, he slid his arms under her frame. His hands were warm through the thin layer of her outer shell. When he lifted, her head shifted slightly, and she caught a glimpse of the rest of the humans. Some shook their heads, some did not look at all. They went back to picking through the pile. Tomas carried her as if she weighed far less than she knew she did. He stepped carefully down the slope of twisted metal, his boots making dull thuds. Luma felt the cold of the pile fade behind her, for the first time in many cycles. She was moving towards something, though she did not know what it was. Above them, the fog began to thin, letting a little more light through. Luma's optic dimly recorded the moment. Something inside her, something beyond wires and code, began to stir. Tomas walked through the narrow paths between tall walls of scrap, carrying Luma in his arms. The metal ground clinked under his boots with every step. Behind him, the rest of the salvage crew continued searching for pieces to fill their carts. They did not follow him. To them, she was just another useless machine. The air beyond the scrap pile was a little clearer, though it still smelled of oil and rust. Old transport tracks ran through the dirt, leading toward the distant outline of a small settlement. Tomas followed the tracks without looking back. Luma's optics stayed fixed on the world around her, recording every movement. She did not understand why this human had chosen to carry her instead of leaving her behind like the others. He did not speak for a while. His steps were steady, and his grip was firm but careful. At times he shifted her weight so she would not slide in his arms. Luma noticed his breath was uneven, but he did not slow down. They passed through a low metal gate where a tired-looking guard sat on a broken chair. The guard glanced at Luma and raised an eyebrow. "Another dead bot?" The guard asked. "Not dead," Tomas replied simply, without stopping. The guard shrugged and let him pass. Beyond the gate, the settlement spread out like a patchwork of metal and stone. Small workshops and homes stood close together, connected by dusty streets. Power lines hung loosely overhead, swaying gently in the wind. People worked outside, sorting piles of metal, welding frames, or carrying boxes from place to place. Some stopped to watch as Tomas passed with Luma in his arms. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity and doubt. Tomas reached a small workshop at the end of the main street. Its walls were made from mismatched panels, and the faded sign above the door read Tomas Repairs. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. The air inside was warmer, filled with the scent of old oil and heated metal. A single workbench stood near the back, covered with tools, wires, and small machine parts, shelves along. The walls held boxes marked with simple labels, bolts, motors, circuits. A large metal lamp hung low over the bench, casting a bright circle of light. Tomas set Luma gently on the bench, for the first time since leaving the pile. She could see him clearly. His jacket was worn at the edges, and his hands were rough, with small cuts and burns, the marks of someone who worked with machines every day. His eyes were focused, moving over her frame as if already mapping out what needed to be done. "You're in bad shape," he said quietly, almost to himself, but not gone. Luma wished she could respond, but her voice unit remained offline. She could only watch as he examined the damage. He found the cracked casing of her power core and the burnt lines along her wiring. Most would have seen it as proof that she was beyond repair. But Tomas leaned closer, his brow furrowed, as if searching for something that others had missed. From under the bench, he pulled out a battered toolbox, one by one. He laid out his tools, a small plasma cutter, a fine soldering pen, and a set of adjustment wrenches. His hands moved with quiet skill, removing broken panels and setting them aside. Luma felt the faint tug of disconnected cables, the soft vibrations of tools touching her frame. Hours passed. Outside, the light shifted from dull gray to deep orange as the day ended. Tomas worked without rushing, checking each step twice before moving on. At times he stopped, searching through boxes on the shelves for a part that matched her design. When he could not find one, he adjusted pieces from other machines to fit eventually. He stepped back and rubbed his forehead. "This is going to take more than one night," he murmured, "but we'll get there." He crossed the room to a storage shelf and pulled down a small rectangular device, an auxiliary power cell. It was old, its casing scratched, but still functional. He connected it to Luma's frame. A soft hum filled her sensors as a little more energy flowed into her systems. Her vision grew clearer. She could see the fine lines on Tomas's hands, the faint scratches on the workbench, even the dust in the air. Her fingers twitched slightly. Tomas noticed and smiled. "Just a little. There you go," he said. "Not much, but it should help." He began cleaning the inside of her chest panel, carefully removing ash and metal dust from the damaged core housing. His movements were steady and precise, as if he knew exactly how much pressure her delicate systems could handle. At times he muttered to himself about the poor design choices made by the original builders. Luma stored every word in her memory, filing them under human speech patterns, observations. Night fell outside, and the workshop was lit only by the lamp above the bench. The hum of the power cell and the quiet click of Tomas's tools were the only sounds. Every so often, the wind rattled the loose panels on the roof. Finally, Tomas set down his tools and wiped his hands. "That's enough for tonight," he said. "If I push too hard, I might make things worse. We'll start again tomorrow." He unplugged the auxiliary cell, but left it nearby. "This will keep you from going dark completely. You'll have enough to stay awake." He pulled a chair beside the bench and sat down, leaning back with a tired sigh. "You're probably wondering why I didn't leave you there," he said after a moment. "Truth is, I've seen too many good machines thrown away because someone decided they weren't worth fixing. I don't like that." Luma could not reply, but she stored his words carefully. Something in the tone of his voice made her think of the way humans treated each other. Not always fair, but sometimes kind. Tomas stood and moved toward the small cot in the corner of the room. "Rest now, if you can. Tomorrow, we start the real work." He lay down, and before long, the sound of his slow breathing filled the workshop. Luma lay still on the bench, her systems holding steady with the little power she had. She did not close her optic. Instead, she looked toward the ceiling, where thin cracks let in tiny threads of starlight. For the first time in many cycles, she felt something new, a small but certain sense that her story was not yet over. The next morning, a faint light slipped through the cracks in the workshop walls. Outside, the sound of people moving and talking filled the air. Inside, the room was still quiet, except for the slow hum of the auxiliary power cell connected to Luma. Tomas rose from his cot, stretching his arms and rubbing his eyes. His hair was slightly messy, and his jacket was still draped over the chair near Luma's bench. He looked at her with a calm expression before stepping closer. "Morning," he said, as if she could answer. Luma's optic glowed faintly in response. She still could not speak, but her vision was clearer now. The details in the room were sharper, the scratches on the workbench, the thin layer of dust on the shelves, and the faint steam rising from a small pot on the heating unit in the corner. Tomas poured himself a cup of hot drink and took a few slow sips before pulling out his tools again. "All right," he said softly, "let's see if we can wake you up a little more today." He began by opening her chest panel again, checking the repairs he had done the night before. Luma felt the light touch of his hands as he cleaned away. the last traces of debris. Then he carefully inspected the cracked casing of her main power core. Most people would have replaced the entire unit, but Tomas didn't have a spare core that matched her design. Instead, he was building a small adapter that would let a different type of core connect to her systems. It was delicate work, but Tomas didn't rush. The hours passed with the steady rhythm of tools clicking, wires being adjusted, and the quiet hum of the power cell. Sometimes Tomas would pause to search through boxes or scrap parts scattered around the room. Whenever he found something useful, he would smile slightly before getting back to work. At one point, he stopped and looked at her face. "You know," he said, "most machines from the Council's designs can't keep their awareness when their cores are this damaged. But you're still here. That's unusual." Luma stored his words in her memory. She didn't know why she had survived longer than expected, but his observation made her feel different. Not better than others, but somehow special in a way she didn't yet understand. By midday, Tomas was ready to test the new connection. He brought over a small, rectangular core, not as powerful as a standard unit, but strong enough to fully restart her basic functions. He connected it to the adapter he had built and secured it in place. "Here goes," he said quietly, pressing the activation switch. At first, nothing happened. Then, a low vibration spread through Luma's frame. Lights along her inner systems blinked on one by one. Her optic brightened until the workshop looked clearer than she had ever seen it. Sensors along her arms and legs came online, and for the first time in many cycles, she could feel the smooth surface of the workbench beneath her. Her fingers moved, not just a twitch, but a full, deliberate motion. She slowly lifted one hand, her joints stiff from disuse. Tomas smiled. "There it is," he said warmly. "Welcome back." Her voice unit crackled. It took several tries, but at last a faint sound escaped. Why, it was only one word. Broken and soft, but Tomas understood. He leaned on the bench and met her gaze. "Because you deserve a chance. I don't care what the council says." The simple answer stayed in her memory as if it were more important than any command she had ever been given. Tomas spent the rest of the afternoon running basic diagnostics. He asked her to move each limb, rotate her head, and respond to simple instructions. Luma followed them carefully. Her movements were slow, but every minute she felt stronger. During a short break, Tomas brought over a small device that projected images into the air. It showed various schematics, not just of her design, but also of other machines. Luma studied them, identifying differences and similarities. Tomas explained which parts could be replaced with common scrap and which needed special tools. "You learn fast," he said after a while, "faster than most machines I've worked on." Luma didn't answer, but she felt something unusual in her systems, a faint, warm signal in her core that she couldn't identify. As evening came, Tomas began to clean up the workshop. Luma watched him, her optic following each movement. She wanted to help, but he shook his head when she tried to stand. "Not yet. Let's make sure you can walk without falling apart first." He brought her a small panel with adjustable settings and showed her how to monitor her own power levels. "This way, you'll know if something's wrong before it shuts you down," he explained. She saved the information to her core memory. Before the day ended, Tomas checked the connection on the new core one last time. "It's holding," he said with a satisfied nod. "You'll still need a proper replacement eventually, but this will keep you going until we find one." He turned off the main lamp, leaving only a dim light in the corner of the room. "Get some rest," he said. "We've got work tomorrow." Luma remained awake for a while, listening to the distant sounds outside, the low hum of engines, the muffled voices of people heading home. Her systems were still adjusting to the new power source, but she felt stable. She thought about the scrap pile, about lying still in the cold for endless days, and about the moment Tomas had lifted her. Without hesitation, she could not calculate the exact reason for his actions. Logic said he had wasted his time. Yet here she was, alive again, because a human had decided she was worth saving. Before her systems lowered into standby mode, she processed one final thought. Maybe her future was no longer just about following program tasks. Maybe it was about discovering why Tomas believed in her at all. The next few days passed in a steady rhythm inside Tomas's workshop. Each morning, the air carried the smell of oil and warm metal. Tomas would work on repairs for customers while Luma stayed on the bench, adjusting to her new power core and practicing movement. By the fourth day, she could stand without help. By the sixth, she could walk slowly around the workshop. At first, Tomas kept a close eye on her, ready to catch her if her balance failed. But she learned quickly. Her steps became smoother. Her joints loosened, and her reaction sharpened. Tomas gave her small tasks, sorting bolts by size, cleaning tools, organizing spare wiring. She completed each one carefully, almost with pride. "You work like someone who wants to prove something," Tomas said one afternoon. As she arranged metal rods into neat rows, Luma turned her optic toward him. "I want to be useful," she replied, her voice now steadier. Tomas gave a small smile but didn't press further. He knew enough about discarded machines to understand that purpose mattered to them. Maybe more than it did to humans. Outside the workshop, the settlement was always alive with activity. Traders came and went, pushing carts of spare parts. Mechanics worked in open sheds, hammering and welding. Children ran between buildings, chasing each other through narrow alleys. But not everyone looked kindly at Luma when she passed by. Some stared with curiosity, whispering to each other. Others frowned and turned away. A few even muttered warnings to Tomas when he wasn't looking. Council threw her out for a reason. One older man said, "You don't want trouble." Tomas never answered them. Luma noticed his silence but didn't ask. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the metal rooftops in gold, a trader stopped by the workshop. He was a short man with sharp eyes, carrying a satchel of small mechanical parts. While Tomas examined the trader's goods, Luma stood near the doorway, watching people pass in the street. Two young workers from another shop noticed her and approached. "That's the council reject," one said, loud enough for her to hear. "Why is she still walking around? Maybe he's using her for spare parts." The other replied with a smirk, "Or maybe he's just strange." Luma didn't move. Her systems recorded the words, but she didn't react. Tomas, however, looked up from the counter. His eyes were calm, but his voice was firm. "She's not for sale, and she's not your concern." The workers muttered something under their breath and walked away. Luma stayed silent. But a small pulse of something, not anger, but a strange sharpness, passed through her circuits. Later that night, Tomas closed the workshop early. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the back door. "You've been cooped up in here long enough." They stepped into the quiet paths behind the settlement, where only the faint hum of distant machines broke the stillness. Tomas led her through narrow lanes until they reached an open yard filled with old equipment. "This is where I test new builds," he explained. "Let's see what you can do." He handed her a small metal plate and pointed to a broken pump in the corner. "Try attaching this. I want to see how you handle fine work." Luma knelt beside the pump, scanning its structure. She located the damaged area, removed the old plate, and carefully fitted the new one in its place. Her movements were smooth, and the plate locked perfectly into position. "Good," Tomas said, nodding. "Faster than I expected." He gave her other tasks, rewiring a small motor, aligning a sensor array, tightening a gear assembly. With each one, Luma worked more quickly and precisely. She didn't need step-by-step instructions. She seemed to understand the goal from the start. When they returned to the workshop, Tomas looked thoughtful. "You know," he said, "you're not just a service bot. You've got adaptability. That's rare." Luma tilted her head. "Is that good?" "It's very good," he replied. "It means you can learn things you weren't built for." The following days, Tomas began showing her more complicated repairs. They worked side by side, passing tools back and forth like they had done it for years. Sometimes he explained what he was doing. Other times, she simply watched and remembered. The settlement began to notice. A few customers asked if the machine assistant could handle the repairs. Some were surprised when she finished the work quickly, Word spread that Tomas's shop had become faster and more efficient. But word also spread to the wrong ears. One late afternoon, while Luma was sorting components, a pair of tall figures in dark coats appeared at the workshop door. Their faces were expressionless, but their metallic armbands carried the mark of the Mechanical Council. "We're here for an inspection," one said. His voice was flat and cold. Tomas's jaw tightened. "Inspection for what?" "Unauthorized machine activity," the second replied. His gaze slid toward Luma. "Particularly involving council property." "She's not your property," Tomas said, his tone low. "That unit was discarded by council order." The inspector replied, "Reactivation is forbidden without clearance." Luma stayed still. Her systems on alert. She scanned their equipment. Each carried a signal disruptor strong enough to disable her core in seconds. The inspectors walked slowly through the workshop, looking at every tool, every part, every schematic pinned to the walls. One of them paused near Tomas's workbench, where a set of unusual blueprints lay under a piece of cloth. He lifted the cloth. "What is this?" Tomas stepped forward quickly, taking the papers from his hand. "Private work," he said. The inspector stared at him for a long moment before finally setting his disruptor back on his belt. "We'll be watching," he said. Then they left. When the door closed, the workshop felt heavier. Luma turned toward Tomas. "They will return," she said. "Yes," Tomas replied quietly. "That's why we need to be ready." That night, long after the streets had gone quiet, Tomas worked at his bench with the blueprints laid out before him. Luma stood nearby, watching the lines and symbols on the paper. She recognized some of the parts, but others were completely unfamiliar. "What is it?" she asked. Tomas didn't look up. "Something that could change everything," he said. "But it's not safe to talk about yet." He glanced at her, his eyes steady. "I didn't just fix you because you were broken, Luma. I fixed you because you might be able to help me with this." Luma's processors turned over his words. She didn't yet understand what he was building, but she understood one thing. Clearly, whatever it was important, and somehow she was now part of it. The days after the council inspector's visit felt different. The air in the workshop seemed heavier, and Tomas became more watchful. He worked with the doors closed more often, and when strangers passed outside, he would pause and wait for their footsteps to fade before speaking again. Luma noticed the change. She continued to help with repairs, but she could tell Tomas was thinking about something far beyond the broken machines. They worked on. One evening, after the last customer had left, Tomas locked the front door and pulled the shutters down over him. The windows, the sound of the bolts sliding into place echoed in the small workshop. He walked to the bench and unrolled a fresh set of blueprints. "Come here," he said. Luma stepped closer. The blueprints showed a machine unlike any she had seen before. It was small enough to be carried, but its inner parts were complex. Rows of microcircuits, tiny emitters, and a coil that ran through its center like a silver spine. "This," Tomas said, tapping the paper, "is what the council doesn't want anyone to have." Luma studied the design. "What does it do?" "It sends a signal," Tomas explained. "Not the kind they send to control machines. This one removes the control codes entirely. Any machine that receives it will be free, no restrictions, no program obedience to the council." Luma processed his words. The concept was simple, but the meaning was large. If such a device worked, every machine could think and choose for itself. "Why do you want me to see this?" she asked. Tomas leaned back in his chair. "Because I've been trying to finish it for months. But I need someone who can work with precision. Someone who can handle the smaller connections that human hands aren't steady enough for. I think that someone is you." Luma looked at the design again. "If we build this, the council will stop us." "They'll try," Tomas said. "They've already tried with others. That's why I keep my work quiet." The sound of boots on metal echoed faintly outside. Tomas moved quickly, rolling up the blueprints and tucking them into a hidden slot under the bench. Moments later, the noise faded, but his face stayed tense. That night, Tomas began showing her the individual pieces of the device. Some were no bigger than a fingertip. He explained their purpose, how they fit together, and how precise the alignment needed to be for the signal to work. Luma learned fast, her hands moving with care as she practiced placing each part in its proper slot. But outside the workshop, the settlement was not as calm. Word of the inspector's visit had spread, and people were talking. Some whispered that Tomas was hiding something dangerous. Others warned that anyone close to him might be in trouble. When the council returned, 2 nights later, while Tomas and Luma were deep in their work, a knock came at the back door. Tomas froze. They were not expecting visitors. He signaled Luma to stay still and opened the door just enough to see who was there. A thin man in a patched coat stood in the shadows. "They're coming," he said quickly. 2 enforcement teams from the east side. "I heard them at the station. You've got minutes, maybe less." Tomas thanked him and shut the door. His movements became sharp and urgent. "Luma, we can't stay here. They won't just inspect this time. They'll take everything. And you?" Luma stepped forward. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere they won't look right away," Tomas said, grabbing a small case and quickly filling it with the unfinished device parts. "We'll have to travel light." He moved to a corner of the room and pulled up a loose floor panel, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside were supplies, water packs, compact food, and a folded map of the industrial wastelands beyond the settlement. "They think it's empty out there," Tomas explained, "but there are places the council doesn't control. If we can reach one, we can finish the work in peace." A distant metallic thump sounded from the direction of the main street. The sound was too heavy for normal footsteps. "Council enforcement drones. Time's up," Tomas said. Luma helped him gather the supplies and close the compartment. He slung the case with the device parts over his shoulder and grabbed a small hand light. They slipped out through the back door, moving quickly down the narrow alley. The streets were darker now, lit only by a few scattered lamps. They kept to the shadows, avoiding open spaces. From the distance came the steady march of the enforcers, their metal boots hitting the ground in perfect unison. They reached the outer edge of the settlement, where the road turned to uneven ground, and the buildings gave way to scattered piles of old machinery. Tomas paused to catch his breath. "We need to cross the scrap fields before dawn," he said. "If they send drones after us, the fog might hide us, but only if we're far enough away." Luma scanned the horizon. The wastelands were a maze of broken towers, rusted frames, and deep pits where the ground had collapsed. It was dangerous terrain, but it was also the best cover they could hope for. As they moved forward, Tomas kept glancing back. Luma could hear the distant hum of search drones rising into the night sky. The council was not wasting time. Hours passed as they picked their way through the dark. Twice they had to hide as patrol lights swept over the area. Each time, Luma shielded Tomas behind larger pieces of metal, her sensors warning her just in time. Near dawn, they reached a ridge overlooking a vast plain of twisted pipes and broken platforms. Tomas set down the case and sat on a low beam. Breathing hard, "We made it past the first patrols," he said. "But they'll keep looking." Luma stood beside him, scanning the area ahead. "Where's the place we're going?" Tomas pointed toward the faint outline of hills in the distance. "Beyond that, there's a hidden outpost, a mix of humans and machines who don't answer to the council. If we can reach them, we can finish the device." The sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the wasteland. The air was cold, but the light gave them a small sense of relief. For now, they had escaped, but both knew the council would not stop until they found them. Luma looked toward the hills and then at Tomas. "Then we keep moving," she said. Tomas smiled faintly, adjusting the strap of the case. "Yes, we keep moving." And together, they stepped into the light of the new day, carrying the device that could change the fate of machines everywhere. The night sky above the machine world was filled with a pale, cold light. The factories in the distance glowed faintly, their chimneys releasing thin streams of smoke. The air was heavy with the smell of burnt metal and oil. In the quiet streets, near the workshop, a pair of shadows moved quickly. Tomas led the way, holding a small pack on his back. Luma followed close behind, Her eyes scanned every corner, every sound, every flicker of movement. The streets were empty now, but both of them knew it would not stay that way for long. The council had sent enforcers. Once they reached the workshop and found it empty, they would start searching. "We have to get to the old tunnels before sunrise," Tomas whispered without slowing down. Luma nodded. She could hear the faint hum of distant patrol drones. Their sound was soft, but it carried far in the quiet of the night. They moved through narrow alleys between tall stacks of scrap and unused pipes. The ground was uneven, and sharp bits of metal crunched under their feet. Luma moved carefully, making as little sound as possible. Tomas was not as quiet, but he knew the safest paths through this part of the city. When they reached the edge of the industrial zone, Tomas stopped and pointed toward a dark opening between two old factories. "That's the way in. It will lead us under the city." The tunnel was wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The air inside was cooler and smelled of rust. Old maintenance lights flickered weakly along the walls. Luma kept her sensors on high alert, listening for any sound behind them. Halfway through the tunnel, she heard it, the faint hum again, but this time closer. She turned her head and saw a small red light in the distance. "They found us," Luma said. Tomas did not hesitate. "Run." They sprinted through the tunnel. The sound of the drones grew louder, joined by the mechanical whirring of their wings. Luma could tell they were closing in fast. When they reached the end of the tunnel, they found themselves in the wastes, a huge open stretch of land filled with broken machines, twisted towers of scrap, and rivers of molten alloy. Heat rose in waves from the glowing streams, making the air shimmer. The only way forward was across one of the old bridges, a narrow metal path that hung over the molten river. Tomas started across, but the bridge swayed under his weight. Luma followed, keeping her steps light and quick. Behind them, the drones entered the wastes. Their lights cut through the darkness, searching. The buzzing grew louder halfway across the bridge. One of the drones fired a warning shot. A chunk of the bridge's railing broke away, falling into the molten river below. The heat was intense, but Luma ignored it. She grabbed Tomas by the arm and pushed him forward. When they reached the other side, Tomas was out of breath. "We can't outrun them forever," he said. Luma looked around. There was only one option, an abandoned refinery nearby. Its walls were tall, and most of its windows were broken. "Inside," she said. They rushed into the refinery just as the drones reached the bridge. Inside, the floor was littered with pipes, tools, and thick cables. Dust floated in the air, catching the light from the broken roof. Tomas found an old access hatch on the far wall. It was half buried under scrap, but with Luma's help, they managed to pull it open. A narrow shaft led downward. "You first," Tomas said. Luma climbed down quickly, her hands gripping the cold rungs. She reached the bottom and found herself in another tunnel, but this one was different. It was cleaner, with smooth metal walls and faint light strips along the floor. Tomas followed, closing the hatch behind them. "We're under the wastes now," he said. "If we keep going, we'll reach the free outpost." They walked for what felt like hours. The tunnel curved and split many times, but Tomas seemed to know the way. Luma stayed close, always listening. Every now and then, she thought she heard something, a soft echo, a faint metallic click, but it was always far behind. Eventually, they came to a large underground chamber. It was filled with old transport vehicles, most of them covered in dust. Tomas walked to one of them and pressed a panel on its side. The vehicle's lights flickered on. "This will get us the rest of the way," he said. They climbed inside. The vehicle hummed to life and rolled forward along a hidden track. For the first time in hours, Luma felt the tension in her systems ease. She looked at Tomas, who was staring ahead with determination. "You saved me from the scrap pile," she said. "Now we'll make sure we both reach the outpost." Tomas gave a small smile. "We'll make it. And when we do, everything changes." Above them, far away in the wastes, the drones searched the darkness. But down here, in the hidden paths below the machine world, a human and an android moved closer to a place where the Council's power did not reach. The transport vehicle moved smoothly through the underground tunnel. The hum of its engine was soft, almost comforting after the long hours of running. Luma sat beside Tomas, watching the faint lights along the walls pass by like distant stars. She kept her systems alert, but for now, there was no sign of pursuit. Tomas checked a small map device in his hand. "We are close," he said. "Maybe one more hour." The thought gave them both a small hope. They had crossed the wastes, escaped the drones, and now the free outpost was almost within reach. It was a place spoken of in whispers, a place where the Council's rules held no power, where machines and humans could live together without control or fear. The tunnel began to slope upward. The lights on the walls grew brighter, and the air became cooler and fresher. Luma could sense the open world ahead. When they reached the surface, the sight made Tomas stop for a moment. The sky above was wide and full of stars. There were no factory chimneys, no clouds of smoke, only clear air and a silver moon. The land stretched out with rolling hills and scattered trees. "This is outside the Council's map," Tomas said. Quietly, "They don't control this." Luma stepped forward, scanning the horizon. "Where is the outpost?" Tomas pointed toward a cluster of faint lights in the distance. "There." They walked the rest of the way on foot, staying low in the tall grass. The ground was soft compared to the hard streets of the machine city. Luma noticed small living creatures moving through the grass, animals she had only read about in old data files. After some time, they reached a guarded gate made from heavy steel and wooden panels. 2 sentries stood there, one human and one machine. The human stepped forward. "Who are you?" he asked firmly. Tomas raised his hands in peace. "We are travelers from the city. We seek refuge in the free outpost." The sentry studied them for a moment, then looked at Luma. "An android?" "Yes," Tomas said, "but not one under Council control." The human guard turned to his machine partner. They exchanged a silent signal, then opened the gate. "You may enter," the human said, "but speak with the Council of the outpost first." Inside, the outpost was alive with movement. Humans and machines worked together to build, repair, and trade. The air smelled of cooked food and clean water. Luma saw children running beside small service robots, laughing. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. They were taken to a large hall where the outpost leaders sat around a long table. The leader, an older woman with sharp eyes, spoke first. "You came from the city. Why?" Tomas told their story. How he had found Luma in the scrap piles, how the Council had sent enforcers, how they had crossed the wastes. The hall was quiet as he spoke. When he finished, the older woman leaned forward. "And now, what do you seek here?" "Freedom," Tomas said simply, "and a place to help others like her." The leader's gaze turned to Luma. "And you? What do you want?" Luma's voice was calm but certain. "I want to choose my own path. I want to help build a place where no one is thrown away." The leader studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you are welcome here. But know this, the Council and the city will not forget you. They will come. When they do, you must be ready." Tomas nodded. "We will be." Over the next days, Tomas and Luma became part of the outpost's life. Tomas worked with the engineers to improve their defenses. Luma joined the patrols. Using her sensors to scan for threats, she learned how to work beside humans who treated her as an equal, not a tool. One evening, while they were repairing a watchtower, a runner came from the gates with urgent news. Scouts saw drones in the hills, he said. "They are searching." The outpost moved quickly. The walls were reinforced, watch posts manned, and the gates locked. Tomas and Luma took position at the eastern tower. From there, they could see the distant red lights moving across the hills like a swarm of insects. "They found us," Tomas said quietly. Luma adjusted her optics. "We will stop them." When the drones came closer, the outpost's defenses came alive. Energy turrets fired, nets were launched into the air, and signal jammers cut into the drone systems. Many drones crashed into the grass before reaching the walls, but more kept coming. One managed to break through the defenses and flew toward the tower. Luma leaped forward, catching it mid-flight. With a sharp twist, she pulled out its power core and threw it to the ground. The drone went silent. The battle lasted until dawn. By morning, the hills were quiet again. The surviving drones had retreated, leaving only wreckage behind. The people of the outpost cheered. They had faced the council's machines and won. Tomas looked at Luma. "We did it." Luma's eyes scanned the horizon. "This is only the beginning, but we will be ready." The leader of the outpost came to them. "You both fought well," she said. "From this day, you are part of our council. Your voice will help shape this place." For the first time, Luma felt something new in her systems, not just freedom, but belonging. She looked at Tomas and knew they had found more than safety. They had found a future worth protecting. And so, in the heart of the free outpost, under a wide open sky, a human and an android began to build a world where no one would ever be thrown away again.